Welcome back to Revise and Resubmit, the podcast that takes, those really dense academic papers and makes them surprisingly interesting. I'm Pavlov.
And I'm Nikita.
We've noticed a lot of you are tuning in, which is amazing, but I haven't quite hit that subscribe button yet.
Yeah, and that little button, honestly, it's so small, but it makes such a huge difference in helping us reach more people with these important discussions.
Right. It's true. Like the algorithms, those mysterious forces that decide what we all see and hear, they pay a lot of attention to subscriber numbers.
Yeah, think of it like the subscribing. It's like casting a vote for quality content, So these insightful research discussions don't just get lost in the sea of all the information out there.
More subscribers equals more visibility. Right. And that means more resources for us to make even deeper dives for you.
Yeah.
Maybe bring in experts for interviews, even do some live Q&A sessions where you can jump in.
Yeah, exactly. It's all about building a community around research,
Yeah.
where curiosity thrives and knowledge is like shared and debated. We got a heads up from you, our listener, about this really interesting paper, A Theory of the Startup Workforce. So today, we're going to dig into that. Try to understand what's unique about the folks who jump into startups super early and why they're so important in figuring out where the company actually goes.
Absolutely. And what's key here is that this theory kind of shifts the lens. It's not just about the founder's big idea. It's saying these early hires, they're actively involved. They're, co-constructing the opportunity itself, not just showing up for a job.
Co-constructing. Okay.
So for you listening, think of it less like just hiring and more about the basic mechanics of how these young companies actually find their footing.
Right, co-construction. And the theory hinges on these two types of stories, these narratives, doesn't it?
That's right, two narratives.
You've got the entrepreneurial opportunity narrative, that's the startup's big story, the potential, the pitch, right?
Yeah, the big vision.
And then the career fit narrative, which is how the employee sees this whole thing fitting into their own, career path. And these two stories are always interacting.
Exactly. Constantly influencing each other. And what's really fascinating is how these stories change in their fidelity.
Fidelity, like how clear they are.
How complete, how coherent. Early on, the startup story, the opportunity narrative, it's often pretty fuzzy, kind of intentionally broad. And that ambiguity, perhaps surprisingly, is actually a benefit at that stage.
Yeah, you do wonder, don't you? Why would someone jump into what looks like total chaos? Or how can those first maybe 5 or 10 hires have such a massive impact down the line? This theory feels like it might give us some answers.
I think it does. And one of the first points it makes is that, we hear a lot about founders and we hear about VCs, but these early employees who are absolutely vital, they often get overlooked in the story. But research, like Van Lanker's work, shows they're absolutely crucial in making those initial ideas, real, tangible.
So the founders have the spark, maybe, but these guys are building the engine.
Something like that, yeah. They're figuring out the how.
And it's just a totally different world than joining, say, IBM, right? Less structure, way more volatility. Barron and Hannon were talking about this years ago.
Absolutely. Total contrast. So the question becomes, who are these people? Who signs up for that level of uncertainty?
Yeah.
Well, the data suggests some patterns, often younger, maybe earlier in their careers.
Okay.
So the potential downside, if the startup fails, maybe feels a bit less catastrophic.
Yeah.
Ouimet and Zarutsky found evidence for this.
Lower stakes, maybe? Lower opportunity costs?
Right. And generally a higher comfort level with risk. Roach and Sauerman touched on that too.
Makes sense. Risk tolerance is key, but it can't just be about age and risk profile. Surely there must be other drivers.
Oh, definitely. And the theory really puts a lot of weight on the non-financial stuff.
Like what?
Things like autonomy, the chance to actually make decisions, shape your own work, the buzz of innovation, that feeling of building something, what some call psychological income.
Okay. The non-monetary rewards.
Exactly. And don't underestimate the pull of really passionate founders. Their belief can be infectious, as Lewis and Carden pointed out. It's often not just about the potential IPO payday.
So they're looking for meaning, impact, a chance to build, not just a paycheck. Okay, let's circle back to these narratives. Startups selling a story of the future. What does that entrepreneurial opportunity narrative actually look like in practice?
Think of it as the main storyline about the company's ambitions. It's what you hear in the investor pitch deck, right? It's how they talk about their vision at conferences, maybe the core ideas in the very first business plan. It's all about painting this really compelling picture of what could be.
And this theory says opportunities aren't just found, they're constructed, actively built.
Precisely. It draws on constructivist thinking, like from Week. The idea is these opportunities don't just exist out there waiting. They get shaped and developed through all the interactions between founders, stakeholders, and especially these crucial early employees. McBride and Webker's research supports this idea.
So it's constantly evolving based on who's involved and what's happening.
And these narratives capture that, both the relationships within the startup and how the whole venture unfolds over time. Garud and Giuliani talked about these temporal and relational aspects.
Okay, so that's the company's story being built. What about the employee's side? How do they build their career fit narrative?
Well, think about modern careers. They're often less linear, right? More like forging your own path. Arthur and Rousseau called them boundaryless careers way back.
Right, not just climbing one ladder.
Exactly. So it's less about hitting objective milestones like got promoted, and more about how people subjectively make sense of their career journey. Arthur and his colleagues discussed this shift to subjective interpretation.
It's about their personal story, how they see this job fitting in.
Precisely. And again, taking that constructivist view, these career fit narratives are built through thinking and interacting. It's how employees understand their current role by connecting their past experiences, what they're doing right now in the startup, and what they hope for in the future. Shipp and Jansen's work is really important here. They emphasize these narratives aren't fixed, they're constantly being tweaked, especially in a really fluid place like a startup.
And this narrative fidelity idea, how clear or fuzzy the story is, seems central. Why is that so critical?
Well, fidelity is just about how complete and coherent the story feels. And early on, these entrepreneurial narratives, they tend to have low fidelity. They're often deliberately a bit vague.
Deliberately vague. Why would that be good? Seems counterintuitive.
Because that ambiguity creates room to maneuver. It allows the startup to cast a wider net, appeal to different kinds of stakeholders, investors, partners, employees who might see different things in it. Fisher and others noted this.
Ah, like a Rorschach test almost. People see what they want to see in it.
Sort of. Sudbury called them hooks, broad enough to snag interest from various parties. But as the company finds its way, the narrative naturally gets clearer, more defined, higher fidelity. It starts reflecting a more concrete reality, as McBride and Webker observed. And the same thing happens with the employee's career fit narrative. It shifts as they move from just imagining the fit to actually living the job day to day.
Okay, so these initial low fidelity, kind of fuzzy opportunity narratives, how do they actually convince someone to take the leap?
Well, that lack of sharp definition, that very ambiguity, can actually be quite motivating when everything else is uncertain. Sotheby argued this point. It lets potential hires imagine themselves playing a really big part in actually defining that future. It clicks with ideas like the lean startup, the MVP.
Right, build something basic, get feedback, adjust.
Exactly. It embraces revision. Shepard and Gruber talked about this. It's almost like an open invitation.
An invitation to help write the story, not just read it.
That's a great way to put it. The theory suggests this early low-fidelity stage is the sweet spot for employees who really want to make their mark. There's just more room to contribute to defining what the opportunity even is, as Wood and McKinley pointed out. And since careers are more boundaryless now...
people are looking for ways to shape their own journey.
Exactly, within this collective effort of building something new.
And this connects to anticipated fit, the employee projecting themselves into this potential future.
And given the risks, let's face it, most startups don't make it that anticipated fit, that story they tell themselves about their future there. It needs to be pretty powerful, really compelling.
It needs to outweigh the uncertainty.
Definitely. And because the main narrative is still fuzzy, employees can sort of mentally slot themselves in, fill the gaps with their own skills, their own ambitions. Mathias and Williams noted how founders rely on early hires to plug critical holes.
So the startup says, we're going somewhere amazing, and the employee thinks, and I can help get us there, and that will be great for my career.
That's the dynamic. And often, these narratives are also tied to a bigger purpose, right? Solving a real problem. Think about green tech or health innovation. These purpose-driven stories can really resonate on a values level, making the whole thing even more attractive.
Makes sense.
So, the key takeaway here for you listening is really that these early fuzzy narratives are crucial because they let potential employees see themselves as active builders, as co-constructors, and that vision, that becomes the heart of their own anticipated career story.
Okay, so they're in, they bought the vision, they see their anticipated fit. What happens next once they're actually doing the work day to day?
Well, the people who tend to really thrive are the adaptable ones. Those who can handle the ambiguity, pivot when needed. They figure out where they can make the biggest difference right now and often end up shaping their role as they go.
So the job description they were hired for might not mean much after a few months.
Often, yeah. Founders hire for needs, sure, but in a startup, things change so fast. Aldrich and Roof pointed out that employees often just jump on whatever the most urgent fire is. So there's this constant calibration happening, reconciling that initial anticipated fit with the messy present reality.
Which leads to them crafting a present career fit narrative, making sense of the now.
Exactly. This isn't about the future anymore. It's about, what am I doing now? How am I contributing today? And as their role solidifies, maybe, the fidelity of this present narrative increases. It becomes clearer. But it's always dynamic because the startup itself might pivot.
So the present narrative is less about fixed duties, more about I'm the person who steps up and figures things out.
Very much so. Adaptability and commitment to solving today's problems. There are great stories, like Jin Yang at Dropbox early on. He apparently shifted from a community role to more internal, strategic black ops stuff simply because that's where the need was greatest.
Wow, that's a big jump. Sounds like these folks really do become almost surrogate founders, like you said earlier, taking on real responsibility.
Bellingher used that term, yeah. They have to align what they're doing with where the opportunity seems to be heading, even if it means letting go of some initial dreams. And the theory suggests that the faster an employee does this, identifies the need, crafts their present narrative around solving it, the more likely they are to become a true co-constructor of the main opportunity narrative.
So speed matters. Being proactive, jumping on problems, that gets you noticed, makes you more influential.
It signals commitment, adaptability, it shows you get it.
Okay, now scale this up. The startup gets some traction, starts hiring more people. What does that growth do to these narratives and this co-creation dynamic?
Growth is a huge shift. Those fuzzy, low-fidelity narratives, great for attracting the pioneers. But once you have, say, 20, 50, 100 people, you need more clarity, more coherence.
Everyone needs to be rowing in roughly the same direction.
Exactly. And this is where employee entrainment comes in.
Entrainment. Sounds a bit like getting synchronized.
That's basically it. In organizations, Shipp and Richardson define it as coordinating efforts over time. As the team grows, getting everyone aligned with that core opportunity narrative is critical for progress. Wood and McKinley argued this point too.
Helps the new folks understand where things are going.
Right. And as more people get entrained, working together towards this increasingly shared goal, their collective efforts tend to refine the narrative, make it clearer, increase its fidelity.
So more people, more alignment, clearer story.
Generally, yes. Growth fuels entrainment, and entrainment boosts narrative fidelity.
What does that clearer, higher fidelity story do to the original spirit, that co-creation aspect we talked about?
That's the tension, isn't it? Berglund and others talk about opportunities being mutable, changeable, adaptable, especially when the narrative is low fidelity. But as entrainment happens and fidelity goes up, that mutability goes down. The story gets more stable, more set.
Harder to change course.
Exactly. Big deviations become disruptive. Think about famous company mantras like Facebook's old move fast, break things. That became part of their DNA, hard to just switch off. As the narrative solidifies, it naturally becomes harder for any one employee to significantly reshape it going forward.
It sets like concrete, almost.
It's a bit of a self-reinforcing loop. Entrainment boosts fidelity, higher fidelity reduces mutability, and reduced mutability limits future co-construction.
Okay, so growth leads to clarity, but clarity can stifle that early freewheeling creativity. Makes sense.
Yeah.
So how do the employees, especially those early ones, react as the story gets clearer and the pressure to entrain increases?
Oh, the theory suggests that as that main opportunity narrative gets more concrete, more defined, employees often have to do some work on their own career fit narratives. They need to revisit them, maybe revise them.
A reality check moment.
Could be. That shift from the exciting, ambiguous potential to a more objective, defined path can force a reassessment. Does this clearer picture still align with my anticipated fit?
So they look at where the company is clearly heading now and ask, do I still fit here? Is this where I want to go?
Exactly. And Shipp and Jansen remind us, these career narratives aren't static. They get updated with new info, new experiences. Higher fidelity in the company's story provides that concrete information. It might clarify paths, but it might also narrow them.
So they process this new reality.
Right. They engage in narrative processing. Looking back at why they joined, assessing their current role in this clearer context, and projecting their future based on this more defined trajectory. Now, these revisions aren't automatically bad. For some, the increased clarity and stability might actually be a better fit for their evolving goals.
But for others, maybe not. Maybe the defined path isn't the one they envisioned or helped build initially.
Precisely. And think about those really effective early co-constructors, the ones who adapted fast, built strong present narratives. Maybe had a big hand in shaping that higher fidelity narrative. For them, as the path gets more linear, their present fit becomes even more crucial. Does the now clearer role still feel right?
And ongoing entrainment becomes a conscious choice. Do I keep aligning with this?
Yes. If they see their contributions reflected in that solidified narrative, if they feel their impact is baked into the company's story, it makes continuing to align much easier. It validates their role. But if they feel their input was ignored, or the company pivots away from values they helped establish, think about the Etsy example, where some socially focused folks felt left behind that leads to friction, misalignment.
Which can lead to resistance, maybe even leaving.
Exactly. If the high-fidelity story reflects their impact, alignment is more likely. If it doesn't, misalignment grows.
Okay, but here's a twist. Why might some of those successful co-constructors, the ones who did shape things early on, actually resist this move towards higher fidelity and entrainment later?
That's a really interesting point the theory raises.
Yeah.
Because these folks often gained a real sense of agency, of ownership during that chaotic co-creative phase. And it can be tough to let go of that influence as the narrative solidifies and roles become more defined.
They missed the building phase.
Perhaps. Or maybe they want to do it again. They might look for another early stage startup, another low fidelity narrative where they can dive back into co-creation. Or maybe they decide to become founders themselves.
Having seen it done up close gives them the confidence to try it.
Exactly. Seeing a startup grow from idea to reality can be a powerful confidence booster. Plus, some people just prefer that big fish in a small pond feeling. They enjoy the influence, the flexibility that often shrinks as a company scales up and gets more structured. So they might actively seek out new, undefined narratives that better match their desire to build and shape things.
So for some of the most impactful early hires, their ultimate career story might actually involve leaving to start something new or join another messy beginning.
It seems so. That drive to co-construct becomes part of their own narrative.
Wow, okay, this has been really clarifying. So pulling it all together, the big idea is that these early startup employees are way more than just workers. They're active co-creators. And their whole experience is tied up in this dance between the company's evolving story and their own evolving career story.
Absolutely. And for you, the listener, understanding this interplay, the opportunity narrative, the career fit narrative, the shifts in fidelity, the role of entrainment, it gives you a much richer way to think about why some startups make it and why being an early employee is such a unique, high-impact experience.
You came here as the learner, wanting to understand this dynamic. Hopefully, you now have a deeper, more nuanced perspective on the startup world, something beyond just the headlines.
Yeah, so maybe next time you read about a successful company, think back. Think about its early days. What was that initial story they told? How did it attract those first key people? And how did their contributions, their co-creation, shape what that company eventually became? What was the narrative fidelity like back then, do you think?
Definitely food for thought. And look, this deep dive, it's really just scratching the surface of this theory. There's so much more you could explore: team dynamics in early startups, what truly motivates people in extreme uncertainty, the sheer power of storytelling in organizations. Lots more insights waiting there.
For sure.
Thanks for exploring the depths with us today.
And don't forget to subscribe to Revise and Resubmit on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. And if you're enjoying the show and want to support us in creating more insightful content, consider becoming a patron on Patreon. Every contribution helps us continue this journey of exploration and discovery. Until next time, keep those minds curious, keep questioning, and keep revising and resubmitting.